Hey guys, on this week's episode of Pit Therapy, we're talking about the post hardcore band Dead and Divine from Ontario, Canada, how they were originally discovered and first produced by Shane Told of Silverstein. We talk about how they seem to go against the grain lyrically during the height of Christian hardcore bands in the late 2000s, and how they're one of the few bands that actually got heavier from album to album. Let's go, and it's time to open this pit up.
Somebody hit somebody!
Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the Pit Therapy Podcast with Trevor, and I'm here with Kyle and Josh. And this week we're going to be talking about a Canadian band, Dead and Divine, who was around from 2003 to 2012, and then some of the members are currently doing some new projects. But before we get into that, we'll go over some news and info of what's going on in the world of music. Unfortunately, Mean Pete has passed away. Josh, I know that you listened to a bunch of his bands. What about Mean Pete?
Yeah, so he played in a few bands, probably most known for Remembering Never. I don't know if you guys have listened to them. They're super sick, like 2004-ish. His latest one that was probably most popular was Ether Coven, and actually played in a band called Bishop, ex-Bishop X, the straight edge vegan guy. I had some friends post about him that moved here from California that knew him, and he actually, to my knowledge, put a lot of Salt Lake bands like on his playlist and promoted them. Bands like Cherim and Tamerlane, Aftermath of a Trainwreck, those guys. So it's it's a bummer. He passed away from colon cancer, is what I was told. He was diagnosed a few years ago. That was public. And then it looked like in 2021 he was kind of overcoming it, like getting tests done every 3 months or so, and that it came back shortly after that, and it just came back, vigorously, and that was that. So it's a huge bummer for the hardcore scene. It's a sad day for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Remembering Never, I listened to them a little bit back in the day, not a ton, just a little bit. And then going through our straight edge days when ex Bishop X came out, I remember putting them on a couple of times and listening to those guys. But yeah, super sad news. As I was reading the thing, it sounded like he was going to get really into writing and being part of like columns and promoting bands and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, he had a few things written. I don't think they were ever published, is what I had read about. So I'd be interested to see if they actually ever do publish them as like his last words kind of a thing,
yeah, I saw that he had already filmed, I think it was with Lamgo, record store day kind of thing. And it was in the
Yep.
final stages of editing. So watch for that. That should be coming out through them sometime soon. But yeah, super sad whenever someone that influential in the scene passes away. Other news, Head Automatica is coming back. This is the side project from Glassjaw singer. Do you guys have any thoughts on Head Automatica? I know that this band was not in our regular playlist, but they tended to tour with a lot of the bands that we would go see. I saw that they had played with Thrice, Taking Back Sunday, a lot of those types of bands. And they put this on hiatus for a little bit, but Head Automatica is coming back with Foxy Shazam.
that'll be a cool tour. I honestly don't remember Head Automatica very much. I mean, I was a big Glassjaw fan, still am, big Glassjaw fan. So
I remember the name, kind of like I remember the name like the band, the Appleseed Cast, but like I don't remember any songs by the Appleseed Cast. But like, pretty sure they were probably like in an iTunes library, but I don't think I ever really listened to them. But I do remember Glassjaw very well.
Yeah. And then Darkest Hour is coming back with a new album. They just signed with MNRK Heavy Records. And going back through those guys, they are one of the premier heavy record labels right now. Darkest Hour. You guys have any thoughts on Darkest Hour?
I remember the music video. I'm pretty sure for one of their songs, the guitarist is doing a solo in a tree. Pretty sure. At least that's what I remember. But yeah, I like Darkest Hour for what it was. kind of out of my realm because they weren't very breakdowny, or they weren't very, I don't know, moshy, but they were just really good to listen to. The records
Yeah,
always sounded good.
just metal, straight metal music, right? My background with Darkest Hour is Silverstein. We talked about the sampler CDs, right?
Yep.
In Silverstein, though, they did a video sampler, and I went and I found it. It's called Mosh, I think, put out through Victory Records, and it had Darkest Hour on there, Comeback Kid, Silverstein, Bayside, Hawthorne Heights, all that kind of stuff. And I remember going in my room growing up, and I had just one of those little box TVs and my PlayStation 2, and I would watch music videos all night long, just on repeat kind of thing. And Darkest Hour was one of those ones that I watched quite a few times. So I just thought that they coming back, I think that they'll put out some cool music. It'll be just some good solid metal music.
Was the Autumn Offering on that? Do you remember that band?
Yeah, the Autumn Offering was on there. I actually have the list right here. A few more people: The Hurt Process, The Perfect Murder, Between the Buried and Me, and then on the lighter side of things, you had June, The Audition, The Junior Varsity, Atreyu was on there. Kind of a weird group. It's like what we talked about with those compilations, though. It's all Victory Record bands, and they just did to continually promote with it from within and sell a few more records.
I remember I bought this Atticus record. You guys remember them
I
at
remember
all?
Atticus.
Yeah.
And it was like a 2 CD deal, and it was like the first CD was like soft emo, whatever, like Brand New, Taking Back Sunday, Death Cab for Cutie, Straight Light Run, whatever. And then the second one was like the heavy metal, and that's where like I remember like bands like Darkest Hour, Suicide Silence, The Autumn Offering, things like that. But it was like very separate, and so you got kind of two of the best of both worlds. But I remember it was like 20 tracks per record.
Nice. Yeah, no, I had a bunch of these things. The one that I remember outside of this one, I had one that had Ringworm on it, and I couldn't get into Ringworm back in the day. So there was like a bunch of bands that I would just kind of skip over and then listen to the few that I would
They're
watch and
coming
everything.
back too, man.
Yeah.
And you heard their new stuff? It's super dope.
Ringworm?
Yeah.
You know what's cool about Ringworm is they have a clip of their song in Secret Life of Pets too.
Oh, really?
Is that
Is
their-
that the metal band?
Yeah, the metal band, when they play it and the dog's going crazy, it's Ringworm.
I guess I didn't catch that. That's all right. That's sick.
That's
They go
way
back
cool.
and listen to it and laugh. Yeah. Yeah. I like Secret
Dude,
Life
this-
of Pets. That's a good movie.
This MNRK Heavy label is pretty sick now, actually.
That's what I said. It's probably one of the premier heavy record labels coming out these days that I wasn't familiar with.
Dude, yeah, let's see. Impending Doom. Under Oath is on there now. Within the Ruins, they were always sick. I liked Within the Ruins. I don't feel like they got a lot of the like popularity they deserved, but Fit for an Autopsy's on there. They're
Yep.
tight. Yeah, they've got some good stuff.
But then you have some like the old school guys like Zach Wilde's on there. I think
Judas
you have
Priest.
Judas Priest is on there. So it's a good mix of the old and the new, which is really cool.
It's kind of interesting to see like what popular labels or just anything in general shift. Like at one point it was, Victory Records, right? And then the next upcoming one was Rise. That was
Yeah.
like the bands like Attack Attack
Yep.
or
I'm
Confide.
sure we'll talk. Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk a lot about
You know.
Rise now because that was like the
But like-
heyday.
But like
with them in
even
mind.
I got in a conversation with somebody about skate shoes. We were talking about old skate shoes that we had. Like the Globe Chet 5s
Yeah.
were super
Etnies
popular.
and stuff. Yeah.
Or like Fallen shoes, Macbeths. That
Yeah.
was a Blink-182. Was that Travis Barker? Or no, his was Famous Stars and Stripes,
Oh, yep.
Circas, and like America's. None of these exist anymore. You walk into Zoomies, and all it is basically Lakai, Vans, Nike SB. That's about it.
That's
Osiris
funny.
D3s. Those were the in shoe, dude.
For
I
real.
remember,
some
like-
sweet gray Osiris shoes, man.
I remember like rolling up my socks to like puff up like the top to make them look cooler.
No, for sure. So it's good to see a lot of these I like seeing when bands are moving record labels and stuff like that. I think that it's making it so that there is going to be some diversity and things like that in their sound. So it'd be interesting to see kind of where we continue to go with some of these old bands coming back and things along those lines. If they stick to like Darkest Hour, just their metal music, or if they start to incorporate some heavier breakdowns and some stuff like that. Well, Dead and Divine. So we're talking about today, Canadian band out of Canada. Canadian band out of Canada, I meant out of Ontario. Other bands kind of from the area: Silverstein, Alexis on Fire, Billy Talent, Counterpart, Protest the Hero, Sum 41, Cancer Back, Comeback Kid. So it's really interesting. The scene itself was really strong coming out of Canada. I mean, these are really popular bands and have done a lot of really good things. But from what I was reading, it sounds like the scene's dying up there.
I I think it's changing. There's some pretty cool pop punk bands coming out of Canada right now, and we'll have to get into that later. But I think it's just kind of shifted a little bit because you name all those bands right now, and it's like all post hardcore, with some variety. But for the majority, I mean, Silverstein, Alexis on Fire, it's pretty standard post hardcore, But there's some pretty cool Canadian like pop punk bands that have started coming out, like Pacific. You've heard of them?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize they were up in Canada. So, no, that's really cool.
The singer from Misery Signals is up in Canada as well.
Yep, saw that one. What do you guys remember about Dead and Divine? I mean, the album that we started with was The Fanciful, right? We just got done talking about how Rise was the record label during this time period, and The Fanciful was one of these albums put out by Rise. But do you guys remember very much about Dead and Divine?
Man, I remember them. I remember liking them a lot more than I do now. And
Okay.
going back and
Mm-hmm.
listening to their albums, it's like I just have changed a lot, I guess. But I remember when listening to the Fanciful and being totally in love with that album. And I have very fond memories of listening to them and seeing them live. But as I've gotten older, I think my opinion of them has changed a little bit. So it's kind of interesting that you get older and stuff changes.
I think I would have been maybe eight. I had been about 18 years old when I first heard them, and I think around that time I was really into Every Time I Die, and I was into Maylene and the Sons of Disaster. And so, like, Dead and Divine to me kind of latched on to both of those bands' sound. I distinctly remember listening to the song San Dimas, and I liked how raw that sound was with the southern riffs. I think between them and like the first EP from Memphis Mayfire, to me just was like, it seemed like the southern rock hardcore was the direction it was trying to take, and it just never ended up sticking for a long period of time. But that was kind of my experience with Dead and Divine. Like, I didn't have any problems with it. I still like it to this day.
Dude, there was such a cool period there in like 2007, 2008 with all these like southern rock bands coming out.
Yeah.
I was down for it.
So there were Southern rock bands, but we talked about this on Scary Kids. Every post-hardcore band had their one Southern rock song on there, right? So Scary Kids had Snake Devil. I went back and looked. Before Their Eyes had Two Stepping Down South kind of thing.
Yep.
And then you had these bands who leaned into it, the Memphis Mayfires and the Dead and Divine and stuff like that. And I said it on Scary Kids. You could put a bunch of these Southern rock post-hardcore stuff on and I'd listen to it all day long. I love this kind of stuff. Lyrically wise, these guys get a bit out there, a bit in the emo realm kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we're saying emo, it's the whiny emo realm kind of thing. So
I sat there like reading through some of the lyrics and I'm like, man, if
how
only
was
the
I
term,
quoting this?
well, no, but I'm just thinking like if only the term like neckbeard and incel was like a big thing back then, because you might have called this. I was reading through some of these lyrics. I was like, man, I get like someone broke your heart, dude. I get it. That sucks. But like, come on, dude. That I struggled with some of their lyrics, and the music was sick. The vocals were sick, but I read some of the lyrics. I was like, nah, man, that's not for me.
For sure, for sure. So these guys were active from 2003 to 2012. They got their start actually from Shane Told of Silverstein. They were playing a show together, kind of a local showcase, and Shane caught their set and he said they were really the only band that stood out to him. And they stood out because they were actually heavier than everyone else. So everyone on the showcase was playing the post-hardcore stuff, lighter, a lot of singing, and these guys came out and just started ripping. He said they got together, they started Verona Records and put out their first album in 2005. What really happened at Lovers Lane? It's a very generic metalcore album, post-hardcore metalcore. Not a ton to this one. Was there anything that stuck out to you guys, or more that it was just kind of where they got their start?
I think it was more where they got their start. You know, what was interesting is one of the articles I read that the singer gave after they had broken up and stuff, but he talked a lot about how there was like a formula that they all like agreed on, and there were he said prerequisites to their songs in Dead and Divine of like they have to have a chorus that sings, right? He has to have clean
Mm-hmm.
vocals. He has to have certain stuff like that, and I think maybe that's probably one of my biggest gripes with Dead and Divine is sticking to that formula so much and not branching out. But right off the bat, even in this EP, brand new band, like they have a formula that doesn't change. You know, even in this album, you can hear the screaming verse and then singing chorus and then bridge and then breakdown and then another singing chorus.
Mm-hmm.
So I I mean it was cool, but yeah, it didn't. Going back and listening to it, it was like, okay, yeah, I've heard this 1,000 times from some other bands.
Right. Yeah, I think this kind of the style of music. I hate the like verse chorus breakdown final chorus. Like radio songs, it's all the same, but it almost sounds like to me like there was almost like too much brain and not enough flow. Like too many cooks in the kitchen, probably a better way to put it. Too many people want to take control of what they want this to be, and like I've sat in a few, I don't know if you call them meetings, probably like a coming to with other bands in the past, and like it was basically arguments of like different ideas and nobody would budge. Final end result was the band split. It was finally just done, but like they were all holding on to something that wasn't worth holding on to anymore. But when I look at the age too, when they started Dead and Divine in 2003, they were still in high school.
Yeah.
And like, you had said earlier, Kyle, like your taste has changed now from what it was
Yeah.
15, 16 years ago.
Yeah.
So maybe, it was fine in the beginning to like get onto a label or play shows or whatever. But then it was finally like, you know what, man, I want to do my own thing. And yeah,
So let me ask you this, Josh, especially because you've had, like you said, you've sat in these meetings or come tos or whatever with bands, and because I feel like Dead and Divine was good enough. Like this album, like we might call it generic, but for being in high school and stuff, like they were obviously good enough to get signed and start
mm-hmm.
making music. And how hard is it to like get out of that mold? Like how hard is it to say like, okay, we need to do something different? Is that what bands talk about? Is that what they think, or is it just kind of like this worked now? Let's just keep doing it until it doesn't.
Like I say, I think sometimes you get to the point of even if it's something that's working, you still just want to play the music that you want to play. But somebody doesn't want to jive with that. They want to just keep doing what's working. I think some people get bored of the same writing process, or maybe someone's taking a final call in the writing process and doesn't tell everybody about it, or like you have this said meeting and everything's good, but then there's a separate text message to other people talking about one member and trying to get everybody to get that member out that has the opposing opinion. Like there's always something under the layers. Any band I've ever been in to this day has had something along those lines. And not that it's necessarily talking crap on the other person. I think it's more trying to figure out how to handle the situation without involving them. But yeah,
Except for the band we were in together.
Yes.
We had no problems, right?
Well, no, that's not true. Freaking our guitar player brought up one kid for singing and gave all the money away from the show we played.
Yeah. Anyways, I was just
What show was
yeah.
that?
The only one you drummed for us at.
Oh. Oh, yeah. You know what's funny? I live down the street from that high school now.
That is funny.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we sucked. Don't ever. Let's not bring that up again.
We were way good. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
That's true.
free. Won a battle of the bands, bro. But no, anyways, this album, it obviously started their path. I think the interesting thing about this one is it got Shane with Verona Records. And looking through, they only signed 9 bands. They only put out like 9, maybe 10 different albums. But there's only one other active band currently, and that's Counterparts. And Counterparts is legit. Some good came from this, right? The fact that Dead and Divine put out what they did and showed up when they did.
So what's interesting is Counterparts and Dead and Divine. I don't know about the other bands, but at least those two. There's only one record with this label, and then they moved on. So from my point of view, it's like that's actually really cool of Shane Told from Silverstein to have this record label. And he's probably just trying to promote Canadian bands. Like, let's help Canadian bands get big. And that's awesome. Like, I'm totally down for that. The scene needs stuff like that. So
that's exactly what it is. I read a thing about Verona. I actually went to their website and it kind of goes through it. And he said, the whole thing I'm here doing is to help guide local bands through the process. He just wanted to get more people out there to be seen and everything like that. And if that means he had to put out an album, that's what he did.
Yeah.
And then what we're going to see next is they signed with Rise Records, right? The premier post-hardcore core record label of this time. 2007, 2008, they dropped The Fanciful. And this is the album that we grew up with, produced by Chris Crummett. If you were on Rise, you worked with this guy. He basically, like, you just went to Chris, apparently, because he did Fear Before the March of Flames, Drop Dead Gorgeous, Catherine, The Devil Wears Prada, Dance Gavin Dance, you name it, he did it. Local tie for us, Hurricane Dane worked with Chris Crummett.
Yep, Hurricane Dane and I Am the Ocean.
Oh, and I Am the Ocean.
That's right. You know what's, I don't know, we've talked about this every single episode about producer influence. And Rise Records, I feel like when they first came out had, pretty cool albums, but then it was like, you're like 6 months down the road listening to Rise bands, you're like, haven't I heard this?
Yep.
They all sound the same.
Yeah, and they've gotten a little better, but I feel like I just kind of quit listening to Rise bands because it was like, man, it's the same band over and over again, and which sucks because I think when some of these bands got off it, like they really started to grow. I feel like and change. The only one that might be the exception to that is Dance Gavin Dance, because I think they're still with Rise, but their sound hasn't changed though throughout the years.
Yeah, but their sound was always a little bit different though too. They did a lot more of the experimental stuff. Will Swan's guitar playing is incredible.
Yeah,
Dance Gavin Dance is they're in the same realm, but I mean at this point, Will Swan has a core named after him called Swan Core. That there's a bunch of bands who try to emulate Dance Gavin Dance.
It's like a genre now, right?
With it itself, yeah.
There's a lot of Rise record bands that started recording with Joey Sturgis.
Yeah,
as well.
That was another one.
So like you listen to The Devil Wears Prada of Mice and Men, Attack Attack, the last somewhat good Confide album. All the drums sound the same. I think Amir recorded with them too. They all sound the same. And like in one sense, like when the sound first came out, it sounded really good. You wanted to go buy two 12-inch subs and put it in your car and watch your rear mirror fall off your windshield. But like then after a while, it just kind of like, it all sounds the same.
Yeah. And it started around this time though, right? The 2007, 2008, the heavy bass drops, all that kind of stuff. It was fun. So yeah, you might be 6 months down the road and be like, yeah, it's the same album. But for those first 6 months, it was fun listening to all the different bands.
And just to clarify, I'm in no way saying that any of these bands were bad.
Right. But Dead it was all
Divine,
the same.
Yeah, Dead and Divine, sweet, and the Fanciful. I mean, even though I cringe at some of the lyrics now that I'm older, but like going back and listening to the Fanciful, that album slaps. Like it's good. I have no qualms with it, So even though I feel like I might have heard that sound again,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not really complaining, right? Like I like pizza. I'm not going to complain when I eat a whole bunch of different pizza.
I
It's
think
the
the th-
same.
I think
So
the thing that makes it stand out, the fanciful to me, versus like their last record, Intimacy, is the fanciful sounds to me. It sounds real, like it was real drums recorded in real time with real amps, it's mic'd up in a room, just like Under Us, Define the Great Line record, Seosin's EP. It just sounded real. And then, like I said, you started listening to bands like Joey Sturgis produced, it was really good. But then, I don't know if you know much history and like how all that stuff's recorded. It's all recorded digitally. There is no amp. You're going straight into a computer, and you're tweaked on all of your settings in a computer, and that's why it sounds so
Tight.
like unrealistically tight. Sounds like
yeah,
a robot, which is
yeah,
cool, but at the same time, most of those bands I would watch play live just weren't that great. Not all, but like
right.
most.
Well, and I guess that's where, yeah, no, I get what you're saying, and maybe that's
It's like a false sound.
right. And you look at when we saw Dead and Divine around the time that the Fanciful was out, the show was wild. It's probably because you do feel a little more of the rawness, the realness,
Mm-hmm.
the emotion. It doesn't feel so prescriptive, overproduced, and they're probably not rolling with like backtracks and stuff. They're actually playing it, all the parts to it. You can feel that energy when you go see bands like that play.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
Matt and Chris, Matt's the vocalist for Dead and Divine. Chris is the lead guitarist. They were kind of dicks. I'll be honest. All the articles I read, they're very egotistical. They were very full of themselves and everything like that. But there were several articles I read where they very specifically said, we don't want to be one of those bands that doesn't know how to play our instruments, that doesn't know how to play our songs. And this is around the time of Intimacy. So this is 3 years after this. And they basically just said, over the last 5 years, it's exactly what you're saying. Band started recording with like Joey Sturgis, a couple of these other guys who it is just direct into the computer, and they go and they try to play a live show and they can't. And
Mm-hmm.
they don't get enough of a crowd coming because they can't put on a good show. It wasn't the case with Dead and Divine. We
Yeah.
saw them when they came through with Emerosa and Lower Def, and it was a fun show. It was a great show.
I think you'd be shocked how many producers actually just record and track what I mean. So, like, if the bass player comes in and can't play the line, the producer will do it.
Just grab it and do it. Yeah.
Like, you would be
Jeez.
shocked at how many, like, I can't think of a band off the top of my head, but yeah,
So
I mean,
this is kind of an interesting thing that you're saying, Josh, and this might take us a little bit off topic, but is it the drummer from Straight from the Path that has the YouTube channel where he basically will listen to a band play live and then call them out if they're using like a backtrack and stuff? And he's basically saying that like these bands don't play music anymore.
mm-hmm,
They're up there like lip syncing with their instruments. And
mm-hmm.
I guess if you can't record it in a studio, how are you going to play it live?
The last time I saw Amir play, they had one guitar player and they had the other guitar tracked on a laptop.
Yeah.
Dude, it's bad. And honestly, when you see a live band play, if anybody in the band that can't suck, it can't be the drummer. And if the drummer sucks, it sets the entire tone of the entire live set after that, and you can't get into it. If he's off time at all, the band's done.
And maybe this is just me getting older and grumpier, but like
Probably.
I feel like if you see one of these bands live and they don't sound like crap, they're not doing it the right way. Like it just doesn't feel real, right? Like if it
Right.
sounds too good, then they're probably not doing it right.
I mean,
Right.
there are exceptions. We've talked about Thrice. Those dudes can play their instruments like nothing else, right? So there
Sure.
are the exceptions of the guys who've been doing it for 20 years. But if you're going to see a new band who is doing all this stuff and young, up and coming, we know that it's happening, right? It's been put out there that Backtrack's happening. I mean, Falling in Reverse full on canceled shows because they lost their laptop.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. They canceled shows because they lost a laptop
You
with
ever
all
heard-
of their stuff.
Have you ever heard of the band Upon a Burning Body?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we played with them at Kilby, and they were doing sound check when they walked up, or when we walked up. And there's an interface called an Axe Effects. Have you guys ever heard of that?
Yeah.
I don't
So
know
in Axe
crap about that.
Effects, you can record with them. You can use them as like a head for an amp, but it's very convenient for bands. But it's basically an interface that you bring your bass player, your guitar player. If you have two, all three, they can run three separate channels, and you run everything out of basically a interface computer, and it plugs in through the PA. Upside, if you have a very good sounding PA, your band is going to sound very tight. But if you show up to your mom's garage to play, you're not playing, or you're borrowing the local band's Line Spider 3 to play out of, and you probably don't have any of your own stuff. So, the sound check was very good, but that was my same thought process. I'm like, so what do you do when you show up and the venue doesn't have direct line in? Like, how do you go about booking shows? Like, is that what you asked for? We can only book venues that have direct line in. It's interesting. Something to
Yeah,
think
no,
about.
it is. And I grew up going to punk shows where it was like you couldn't even hear anything. It was
Yeah.
just noise and people hitting each other. And it's like that. That's what it was about.
But you knew they were playing. That was the other thing too.
Sure.
Is like you could easily tell when the local opener wasn't up to snuff and things like that, versus when the headliners came on and they were all
Yeah.
tight and they knew what they were doing. Like there was clear differences.
On the flip side of that, because again, we're talking about a lot of this, but I'm not hating on people. And the example I'll give is I went to Ed Sheeran with my wife, and I don't want to go to Ed Sheeran and not be able to hear what he's doing, right?
Right.
Because it's different. Like I want to be able to hear his music because it's a different atmosphere, it's a different vibe, it's different music. Cool. Like do all the effects and all the stuff that you need to do to make that sound good in a 60,000 seat stadium. I'm down with it. If I'm going to a 100-person show, I don't want your backtrack. I don't want all this fake stuff. I want it to sound like crap, and I want to get hit by people. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's what's interesting to think about. So a band like, oh, not a band, but a singer like Ed Sheeran or Taylor Swift, for example, they're in these large stadiums, right? Those large stadiums are also hosting like basketball games, monster truck rallies, all this stuff. So it's probably fair to say that they've got 2 or 3 days to break down and set up and get this thing ready for the concert coming. So yeah, you're right. It better sound perfect for 3 days of setup. And I think that makes me a little eerie on bands that are going to show up 2 hours before the doors open and do a quick sound check and want to have direct line and have everything perfect. I'm like, to me, that's Russian roulette, my friend.
I'm going to find a way to like hack that stuff, and then we're just going to play like
Gunter.
Yeah, seriously.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That video of the guy honking the horns, the German like polka and stuff.
It's like too, like how many shows have you been to where the PA goes out, but the bands are still playing?
Yeah.
And they're just screaming. Your PA goes out and you're done.
Done. Yeah.
You can't hear anything, right?
Again, I know we're way off track here, but August Burns Red, if you guys remember that Scream the Prayer tour they did, well, that's probably 2007, 2008 or whatever. And the PA went out for the vocalist, and he was standing up on the speakers just screaming without a mic. And like we were all piling on to like scream with him and stuff. But a band that's as technical and as good, as August Burns Red can still play through that. It's like, you can see where it's real with people, they're not faking anyone.
Right.
So
just wrapping up the Fanciful album, the one thing that I really like about it is I actually feel like it was arranged in a way that almost feels like a concert. The opening song, starting off with that kind of like you're plugging into the guitar and then it hits and it's I Stand Here Helpless Starstruck. Like it's a really solid opener. It goes through 4 songs and then you have that pause, and San Dimas is him just coming in, just screaming, "My name's in lights." And it's one of those things that it's just like they could literally have come in and played Fanciful just front to back, and it was arranged like it should be set up at a concert. And I thought that was a really cool aspect of that album.
These bands around this time, and we talked about it with Scary Kids, they knew how to start an album off right. Because that first song on the Fanciful just comes in swinging, and I love that. The
I
other
think
thing that oh sorry, Josh, go ahead.
I think the thing I like the most about why I like the song San Dimas is like when you're talking about the intro to it. He's not singing. It doesn't sound like he's singing into the mic. It sounds like he's yelling in a room. And I
Yep.
think bands like that, like Dead and Divine, even if they didn't sound absolutely perfect to the record, there's so much emotion behind it, which drives, I feel like, a lot of hardcore kids or harder moshing or what, whatever you want to call it. And that's why I could always get down to it.
Completely
Yeah,
agree with that.
for sure, for sure. The other thing that I'll add on the fanciful, if I could get, and I should probably just go through and do this, but all these bands from like 2007, 2008 ish, post hardcore, emo, hardcore bands or whatever that have acoustic songs on them are some of the best acoustic songs that I can
Mm-hmm.
remember. I'm not kidding. The last song on the fanciful, the acoustic one, incredible. A Day to Remember is softer.
Yeah.
Whatever that
Yep.
acoustic one is, amazing. The Rise Against acoustic song, amazing.
Yep.
Like they need to do a compilation of just acoustic songs on like heavier albums from that time period because they're all straight fire.
So you have the Southern song and you have the acoustic song on almost every post-hardcore album.
Exactly, and
It's just
they're great.
we talk about formulas for songs. That was this formula for the albums too. So no, it was a great album. Like we talked about, the show we caught them on was with Emerosa and Lower Death. I went back through. I think they only played Utah maybe 3 times, 4 times. I couldn't find often that
Mm-hmm.
they actually rolled through town. So I would have liked
See,
to see them more, but
they really didn't tour, and we'll get into the tours in a little bit, but they didn't tour very much
I
compared
I
to at least some of
read
the other bands we talked about.
I read that they went through like 20. I thought it said 20 countries. I could have read that wrong.
they
But
did. They toured a lot of Europe though, and they were
yeah,
often overseas.
yeah. Which actually, even like, so like the band Chelsea Grin, they don't really tour the US that much, but you go over to the UK and they're always over there. Koyo just went over there.
Yeah, I think the scenes in those areas are getting bigger, but I also wonder if at this time, because they're Canadian, I don't know, I could just be making crap up, but I wonder if it's easier not being in the States to have. I feel like it's harder. A lot of these bands in the States just play the States because that's where they're from and people know it. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
when you're like Canadian, you don't like automatically just get plugged into the United States scene that it's easier for you to go to Europe and connect there because it's like you're outside of the States, you relate to it. I don't know.
Well,
Could
also,
be.
and I think if you're having to plan travel, if you're coming to the US or if you can just go to the European countries anyways, like go Europe, the States are there. They can come through anytime. So 2009, the next album, The Machines We Are. This one was produced by a couple crazy guys worked on this album. So Garth Richardson, who is huge up in Canada, but he worked with like Alice Cooper, the Melvins, Motley Crue, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and then bands from our scene: Gallows, Blessed by a Broken Heart, Haste the Day, It Dies Today, and then
Dude,
Eric.
he
Go ahead.
sorry, he helped with Sick of It All.
Yeah,
There's some, I mean, Sick of It All, that's a sweet callback to be involved with them.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And then also Eric Ratz was the other one who worked on this album with them from our scene again. Cancer Bats, Billy Talent, Comeback Kid, very well established with Canadian bands. So much so that he even helped produce like the Bare Naked Ladies and stuff like that when and worked with them.
Nice.
So if you were a Canadian band, Eric Ratz seems like he was a kind of a wish list producer to help work on your stuff. And it was put out by Distort Records, who again is representing those premier Canadian bands that we're used to: Cancer Bats, Billy Talent, Comeback Kid, and things like that. But what are your thoughts on the Machines We Are?
So I think it's the worst out of their three albums, personally. I felt like, yeah, it's got good songs. It's just not my favorite. I felt like it got pretty generic with a lot of it. It didn't feel as unique as the Fanciful did.
Yeah,
And that was my biggest problem with it. But they do have great songs on it. I feel like the heavier parts were definitely heavier. We talked about this last week, that one of the few bands that might have gotten heavier throughout their career.
yeah,
So it does feel heavier, but it felt more generic in my opinion.
yeah. Did you have a chance to track this one down, Josh?
It's it's been pulled off of like streaming services, but the full album is on YouTube.
Right.
And I don't
Yeah.
advocate for it, but you can always go to the high seas, and I'm sure you can find it there.
I actually did not get a chance to dive into this record. Just where I work, it's way easier for me to get on Apple Music than trying YouTube stuff. But I do think it's interesting that they've got a full length out there, and it's not like it was at the first part of their discography. It's like in the middle, and it's just not there.
Just not available. Yeah.
Were you guys able to figure out why it's not there? I've noticed there's a few bands that do that.
No. And so, interesting enough, I went looking for the answer and I ended up on Chris Lemasters, the guitar player's Instagram page, and was scrolling through. And he had posted a screenshot of the fanciful cover art for the 15-year anniversary. And he was like, the album that kicked it off for us all, kind of thing. And someone underneath was like, hey, the Machines We Are is not on streaming services. What's going on? And he responded and said, I don't even know. I'll look into it. So I actually messaged back and was like, hey, do you have any updates on this? Like, I'd love to find out what's happening. And unfortunately, he didn't respond. But the bands themselves, they don't know why they're not on the streaming services.
Yeah, I know.
Some like deep state conspiracy
for Dead and Divine.
they uncovered something in the Canadian government, and they're like, "No, pull it off."
Well, it's weird because like Evergreen Terrace has a missing record on Apple Music, and it's in the middle of their discog. The Warriors, you have to search their name differently for both of their records, or I guess all three. Twitching Tongues, their first LP disappeared, which is like, in my opinion, their greatest record they've ever done, and then it just reappeared, and it's like remastered all this stuff. So,
well, whatever it is, streaming services, get the crap together.
Yeah. So one thing I noticed on this album, I knew it before, but like it really solidified it on this album was, what's the vocalist name again?
Matt Tobin.
Matt Tobin, that's right. His ability to be able to scream and then switch to cleans and then back to screaming is unbelievable. And both of them sound great. Like, I know there's a lot of bands that the vocalist does both, but one of them usually suffers while the other one's good. But he has one of the most incredible screams and like singing voices of any of these bands. And so I can't think of many other bands that could do it as well as he could.
Yeah, no, he's absolutely fantastic with that kind of stuff. And that is one thing, as you read album reviews, everyone comments on that. The range of his clean vocals versus being able to get into those heavy vocals and stuff like that, he was one of the best at doing that for sure. This album has the song Neon Jesus on it. The album before, the Fanciful and stuff like that, they were kind of dabbling with like questioning your faith and stuff like that. Neon Jesus, it's basically a direct attack on religion. This is 2009. This is when Christian hardcore is coming up and kind of at its peak. Do you guys think that it may have been in response to that they took such an attack?
Could be.
I mean,
there wasn't just Christian bands. You had Christian labels. To get on the label, you had to identify as a Christian band. And like, I think there were a lot of bands at that time that were very popular, like for Under Oath, for example, and then the next upcoming band that, in my opinion, that was like way Jesus-y was Sleeping Giant. You literally had people down on their hands and knees, like worshiping while they played, while somebody else was getting sucker punched behind them.
I think it's a lot of age bias with us. You go back even farther to like bands like Bad Religion. This idea of anti-religion and any of this punk, any heavier music has been around for a real long time. I do think though that you're right in this specific genre and scene at the time. It did kind of go against the grain a little bit for sure.
It did. And it was interesting because they were touring with those bands during the Fanciful. And so I'm almost wondering if something happened during some of those tours and stuff like that they just decided, you know what, screw this. We're doing our own thing. And this is our statement towards it.
Yeah. I mean, they also had like Christian festivals.
Scream the Prayer Tour. That tour was sick.
It was
way fun.
But I mean, you think of the bands that were on there, like A Graceful,
Impending Doom, A Kiss for Jersey,
Blessed by a Broken Heart. Yeah, I think at some point, and this isn't to every band, but how many bands do you think were actually Christian bands or just claiming Christian to be on the same label with other bands to get on bigger tours?
Well, I mean, we know under oath, Spencer's totally come out and said that. You know, they claimed Christianity for the first 3 albums, 4 albums,
Mm-hmm.
and then straight up, they were just like, it was part of the facade. It was part of what we had to do, kind of thing.
Yeah, you're kind of being forced to write about stuff you may not necessarily agree with anymore. Like Sleeping Giant, for example, they have that song "Blame It on the Holy Rollers," and like it's a super sick song. I've talked to Tommy about it before, and he's like, sometimes you just write songs you're very immature, and he goes, and yeah, I don't really agree with anything about that song anymore. So like, I remember they played it the very last because it's a very popular song, so they just played it. And like when Brooks supposed to be doing his like heavy vocals from Impending Doom,
Yeah.
he's on the mic. He's like, just like this, and it's the same thing. They're all playing it, and they're all just like, okay, just one more time. I had a buddy tell me one time he played bass in a band from around here, and he straight up was like, I would rather be in a band full of Christians than be in a Christian band. And the way that came up was they were trying to decide as a band if they were going to be a Christian band. And that was his take on it. I thought that was super interesting because it came down to the same thing of like, I feel like you guys just want to claim Christianity just to draw more people in and not because you actually are a Christian band.
Yeah, I don't know. This might be a topic then that we need to hash out on a. We could talk a full hour about a lot of this
Yeah.
stuff, right?
No,
So
we can for sure.
I do think it was interesting that they went against the grain for a lot of these bands that were pretty big at the time. But I mean, whether you believe what you believe or not, like it's good music.
Oh, for sure.
Can't fault that song. Neon Jesus is a dope song from that album,
Yeah. Well, and then we're going to move on to Intimacy now.
Well, so one
Oh, yeah, go
one
for
thing
it.
I wanted, one last thing I wanted to add to this album. I just want to point out how much I freaking hate in any album where it's the last song and it's like a 3-minute song, but then you have 7 minutes added on of nothing. Like, why do they do that? Why?
I don't know. It's the same thing for me as interludes. Get rid of them.
Yeah.
Now, this one, you can't say that they put it on there to meet quota. But
Honestly,
maybe they had to have a 40-minute record and they had to have 7 minutes of dead sound.
I don't know. To me, that sounds like just something really funny that they just stooped everybody. It's like, how many times when you're at a movie theater and you wait after the credits and you're so upset that nothing happens?
There's nothing there. Well, isn't it Newfound Glory that has the song where like they don't do anything and then at the very end they just start screaming or something? Like,
I think that was kind of a common thing, right? Even at the end of Set Your Goals, Burning at Both Ends.
It's actually Story of the Year that you're thinking.
It might have been Story of the Year, yeah.
But Set Your Goals, they did that, Burning at Both Ends. They have a 1-minute song at the end where they talk about like cat farts. Like it was like a thing in the scene being funny,
But you know it's funny you say that too though, because like AFI's record "Sing the Sorrow,"
that one's awesome.
They have the last song, and then it's like a break, and they have some weird interlude. But honestly, the last like hidden song, if you want to call it, to me is probably my favorite song off that record. Yeah. It's very emotionally tied.
Right.
But honestly. But what you're talking about, it just sounds like a funny joke. Let's see how many people can we get with this.
Maybe. Pissed me off because like I was working while I was listening to it, and all of a sudden you just like catch yourself like, hey, it's been like 4 minutes and there's no sound.
Yeah. Is my CD player broken? Almost like introducing to Roadside Records. Have you ever done that?
No.
Oh, I used to call it Roadside Records. If I put a CD in my record or in my CD player in my car and it was trash, I just took it out and threw it on the road. Roadside Records.
Yeah, that's funny.
So, last album they put out, Intimacy, 2011. Jordan, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Valeroit. He has done a ton of stuff with Silverstein, Counterparts, Neck Deep. This ties Dead and Divine back to Silverstein, Shane, and all of that kind of stuff. This is by far my favorite record from these guys. I know, Josh, you just said it sounds too polished and everything like that, but came out in 2011. I was at college at this time. I had this playing nonstop as I was walking around campus. I love this album. front to back.
So this record, it's funny. Kind of, we dove into the records before, and you said the interviews like they wanted to play their instruments, know how to play their instruments, and kind of have that raw sound. This record did not have that raw sound. It seemed to me like it was very like not digital, but definitely way more digital. I don't think the sound was bad, but it didn't have. To me, it sounded empty. Like it didn't have the in your face punch like the records before did, in my opinion. But I mean, it was a little softer on the ears and things like that. But I mean, what I was expecting from Dead and Divine, the record was a letdown to me.
I might disagree with you. I think I'm on with Trevor. I think The Fanciful is still my favorite album, but this album comes out swinging, and there's a few songs like Ditch Pig. The breakdown at the end of Ditch Pig is like nasty. It
Mm.
is so good. So it's hard because I do get what you're saying. Some of like the things I noticed were that it feels definitely overproduced. It still feels a bit generic. They moved way far away from like the southern sound, but the good songs on this album are, in my opinion, some of the best that they've ever done.
Yeah. And then along with that, the lyricism of this album is very aggressive. Again, you're in an era, a time of hardcore Christian bands with Scream the Prayer Tour going on, Christian labels, all that kind of stuff. And this is a complete slap in the face of all that kind of stuff. So it's just, I think that caught me off guard because I was listening to all those Christian bands. I was really listening. I was deep into that. For Today, Impending Doom, all of that kind of stuff was what my typical playlist consisted of until this album came, and it just kind of turned it all on its head with the lyrics and stuff like that. So I think that was part of the reason I kind of latched onto it. Not that I'm not anti. We're actually I'm religious still and everything like that, but
I'm atheist.
yeah, I mean, we don't have to get into that kind of stuff, but it's just so different than what I was listening to that it changed for me.
Right. That's one of the things I noticed about the album is I thought lyrically it was better.
Yeah.
The lyrics made more sense. It wasn't as like cringy with some of the like girl stuff. Lyrically, I thought it was definitely better. So I agree with you there, Trevor.
I think from a musician standpoint, and this is just my own biased opinion, I don't pay attention to lyrics 90% of the time on this kind of music because that's not what my ears are just trained to listen to. I'm listening to like the sound and the guitar work and the drum work and the structure. That's just like my automatic robot mind goes to. And so it's interesting to kind of hear from a different perspective, somebody who's listening to it and like has to like latch onto lyrics. It's funny, like I talk to a buddy of mine all the time, and he'll like send me lyrics from like this from this band, like even old bands like Sick of It All or Madball, and I'm like, I don't know what song that is, but he'll play the riff, and I'm like, oh yeah, I know exactly what song that is. I know for sure. Yeah, I think biggest sticking point I could make of why it was such a letdown to me, it just sounded like something like a Wish version of Every Time I Die. And I wouldn't say it's like bad, but it just like sounded like something Every Time I Die wouldn't have put on their record, but like wrote.
So let me ask you that then. Where's the line then on what you call influence from a band or just trying to do what they're doing?
I don't know. I mean, so when
is it bad that they sound like Every Time I Die? Like, sure, Every Time I Die is going to go down as like one of the greatest bands in the
right?
genre. You're never going to compete with that. But it's like, at what point do you say like, oh, they're just influenced by him, or is it they're just?
I think maybe not influence is maybe the right term. I think it to me it just sounded like an Every Time I Die record, but it wasn't Every Time I Die, and Every Time I Die was still active doing things. And so like if I had to pick between two bands to listen to, it was Every Time I Die. And so to me that's where I was just like, I'd listen to that. But like I go to their old record and it's like they were influenced by Every Time I Die, but it was different. They went,
That's fair.
I gotcha. What I really like about these guys, and we talked about this, is they get heavier. They definitely trend in that direction. And we're not going to do separate podcasts on these bands, but the current bands that these guys are in. So Matt, he did Ritual. They put an album out in 2015. Ritual to me, it's Dead and Divine 2.0.
Yeah.
Without singing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's very heavy. I like that. The Ritual, the record, is it in 2015 it was released?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That should have been, in my opinion, that should have been the next Dead and Divine record for sure.
Well, it's interesting you say that though, because from this Q&A, the article was from
Riff
Riff
You.
You online.
Mhm.
You know, he talks about basically, you know, again, this prescription that they had for each of their albums and songs that had to follow a certain template. And so I
Mhm.
wonder, and he talks about how it kind of made him feel like he couldn't explore, couldn't, you know, express himself the way he wanted to. So maybe Ritual is, and he says that Ritual is more of him being able to come out and play the music he wants to.
So, and I wonder if this was band decision or if it was more of a label producer decision and stuff like that. Because you have Ritual that comes out, and then Chris Lemasters, he puts out 100 Suns, is the first band that he comes back with. They are, how would you describe 100 Suns? I think they're in the realm of kind of the Deftones, kind of some of that heavier sounding
It's
stuff.
it's a softer Norma Jean because it's got the vocals, and that's all I hear
Yeah.
is like if Norma Jean slowed down a little bit, this is what they would sound like.
Yeah, that's
Right.
true. But his latest band, Teeth, is just in your face, as aggressive as you can be. And I'll be honest, like I love Intimacy. I love Teeth. They are over the top heavy, over the top aggressive. They're it's funny you talk about not listening to lyrics and stuff like that. Their lyrics are super in your face kind of thing. And when they talk about it, they're just saying, we're just playing pissed off music for pissed off people. Like
Mhm.
that's the way they describe it kind of thing. I think that when Dead and Divine broke up, I think that Chris was pushing the heavy side of things. And I think that Matt, I don't know, it almost felt like Matt was trying to keep a little bit of the singing, screaming kind of stuff going
Mhm.
after seeing what Chris has done.
Well, and it's maybe I kind of have to go back my words a little bit because like Teeth is very like robotic, right? Their record. It's not necessarily raw. It's like very like chuggy. It's very produced. It's
Yeah.
very heavy. It doesn't have that raw sound. So maybe the better way for me to put it is like don't fence walk it. Like either go all the way one way or just stay. But you try to like meet in that middle of like, well, maybe we'll just kind of go half. I'm like, bro, just if you're gonna put an 808 in, put it in.
That's
Blow my
that's the
speakers out.
that's the issue with the new Better Lovers album, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my opinion on Better Lovers, any like I call them a superhero band because they're like you would think like they pick up bring in all like the best of all these worlds from all these bands and put them into this band. It comes down to the same thing of like too many cooks in the kitchen. So you have this like amp build of like, dude, this should be great. We got a singer from this band, guitar from this band, drummer from this band, and then they release an EP, and you're like, really?
Yeah.
Drink your Ovaltine? A crummy commercial? Like any super band I've seen or heard or listened to.
Overall opinion, I still love Dead and Divine. Intimacy is still one of my favorite albums. I don't care if they come back at this point in time. I hope Teeth goes on a full tour. I'd go see Teeth. I think Ritual's on a bit of hiatus kind of thing. But Intimacy is my pick. If you were to just listen to one album and want the heavy side of things, it's definitely that album for me.
Yeah, I think Fanciful is my favorite album. Although Intimacy has some songs that straight rip, so it's worth a listen to. The Machines We Are, it's all right. I mean, yeah, if it comes back on streaming stuff, I might throw it on. But you know, the Fanciful is, I mean, that to me was pinnacle Dead and Divine. That was, you know, where I felt the most emotion from them and the realness. So that, yeah, that's my favorite album for sure.
I think I'd have to agree.
Yeah.
I think just for more nostalgic, I think it was like, you know, we talk about these bands from like 2008 to 2005 or whatever era. Remember like who I met, like what I was listening to, what street I was driving down, And so it's not just necessarily the music, but it takes me down memory lane of like the good old days, I guess you could call it.
Now, I'll tell you what. If somebody wants me to like get hurt, then let's have a show of all these Southern bands because I'm going to mosh the entire time, and I will not be able to walk for months. You throw like a Maylene, you throw a Static Lullaby playing Rattlesnake, Dead and Divine playing The Fanciful, even like Norma Jean with some of their Southern stuff that they throw. Like bring that all in, and I'm telling you, I'm going hard that whole concert.
Did I tell you I went and saw AFI? I think it was earlier this year.
I think it's February.
Yeah. Anyway, I staged dove. I crowd surfed, went over the barrier, and just to let you know what age we're at now, they had a small section like off to the side in the front for people that are straight up in wheelchairs. And I walked past, and there's like old people in wheelchairs with oxygen tanks and all this stuff. And I was just like, that's the end game. That's me. That's where I end.
Oh, man.
Good stuff.
You want to talk about one more Southern band? We got to give them a shout out. Wilson.
Yeah, Wilson.
Got to get some Wilson.
Well,
their first album.
Exactly.
Of Wilson.
Big asterisk on that. Their first album is good.
So good. But no, we'd love to hear from everyone. Hit us up on the socials at the Pit Therapy. Do you guys remember these guys? What concerts did you guys see them at? And what do you think about the new stuff? So catch you guys next week.
Peace.
Boomer.